July 27, 2005. Our historic and beloved church building was being torn open and apart in preparation for major earthquake retrofit and renovation work to be done. Workers were pulling away walls, exposing floors, ceilings, and lots of red brick. In the sand beneath the tall East Tower, Tony Diaz was working with his shovel when he hit something hard.
Well, what I was, trying to go down there because we had to dig down there in this area here, so we demoed the floor, and I crawled under, and that's what I saw.
Exposing a crate-sized block of sandstone, he saw that it had a 1-inch thick slate lid. It was hollow and contained something. A time capsule had been found. October 9th, 2005, the day for the time capsule opening.
We've been hoping for this day for a long time, and there are surprises, and this was one of them.
So what do you think is in the time capsule?
Oh, I was debating that question.
Maybe some old newspapers or stuff. Oh.
I thought it might be like a French postcard or something.
A French postcard? that sounds good. A French postcard. Yeah.
I never thought about, I didn't think big enough, David, that Ark of the Covenant, now that would have been really good.
Something much more older before any digital things were created.
My wildest imagination, I thought there might be some documents about the life of the church. I mean, this isn't very wild, but I thought there might be a description of the congregation itself and who they were, what they were like, and what they were struggling with.
Maybe some artifacts, some craftsmanship donated by different church members.
This is not only our time capsule, this is the time capsule from congregations past, from the founders. This is their hope and their faith for the future.
That wasn't bad, was it? But now you know why we didn't want you to hear that for an hour. So many of them will be in German, so I don't think we'll bend it down.
With eyes glued to the copper box that had been lifted from the sandstone block, we strained to see what the people of St. Mark's from years ago wanted us to find today. Astonished, it became evident that the time capsule dated not from the construction of our current church building in 1895, but took us back to the original 1863 St. Mark's at Union Square. The congregation had sold the Geary Street lot, currently the site of Macy's, for $105,000 in 1893. These objects traced back a remarkable story of Christian heritage in the heart of San Francisco. Through a century of tumult, urban growth, and social change, St. Mark's has remained a haven for Lutherans dedicated to raising their families in Christian love, to share their passion for worship, and to eagerly serve their fellow San Franciscans through social outreach and civic involvement. March 10th, 1895. An earthquake was felt during the dedication ceremony of our new church building at O'Farrell and Franklin Streets. October 10th, 1906 at 5:12 a.m. St. Mark's survived a 7.5 earthquake, the Great San Francisco Earthquake. The tall East Tower visibly twisted. The church also survived the Great Fire that followed. The church then served as an emergency hospital for victims of the earthquake and fire. As the city recovered and grew, St. Mark's, a spiritual home for generations, thrived. Then came Loma Prieta. The 6.9 quake hit at 5:04 p.m. on October 17, 1989. In the aftermath of the quake, then-current pastor Richard Scopper drove from the parsonage on Moncada Way to Portola, high above San Francisco. Looking down upon St. Mark's in the distance, he announced to bystanders that the church still stood. Many other members of St. Mark's volunteered in relief efforts throughout the city. The day after the quake, members gathered at the church and found the sanctuary had been taped off by city inspectors. No one was allowed in. So on the following 2 Sundays, St. Mark's worshipped in the Urban Life Center next door. One of the first hymns sung by the congregation was Built on a Rock. When San Francisco city engineers later inspected the sanctuary, they certified that, for now, it could again be used for worship purposes. In her desire to ensure the safety of the people of San Francisco, the city passed an unreinforced masonry building ordinance, setting retrofit requirements and timetables. This put St. Mark's under the gun to face hard decisions regarding our beloved but damaged church building. In the early 1990s, St. Mark's looked carefully at whether we should retrofit our existing building or tear it down and build something entirely new. For a while, our congregation hung in the balance between these two choices. Leaders of the congregation studied the costs, benefits, and drawbacks of both options. In the spirit of providing accurate information, open discussion, and transparent decision-making, we gathered for numerous congregational meetings. Then, in May of 1995, we were ready to move forward. We overwhelmingly passed a motion to seek the path of retrofitting our current sanctuary. We proclaimed that our historic St. Mark's building would stand. The first step was to obtain detailed engineering plans for the retrofit. These were submitted to the city in order to meet the first deadline of San Francisco's UMB ordinance. Now it was time to generate excitement and to raise funds for this monumental task.
Well, that's a $45 million project. Today, radio host and author Garrison Keillor came to St. Mark's to help raise some of the money. Exuding his Midwest humor, he said that his visit is motivated by guilt for having made fun of Lutherans.
I've done this for years on the radio. I have profited personally telling stories about you, many of which were only partially true. And so I owe you at least a few Sunday afternoons of my time.
Guests paid between $20 and $100 to hear Keillor and to help save St. Mark's.
2 highly successful capital campaigns later, we have raised $2.1 million from the congregation to rebuild the church. A looming concern was that even successful capital campaigns would not suffice to meet the full costs of our retrofit. In the late 90s, we pursued a number of financing options. Among them, we considered leasing the Urban Life Center site for the construction of a senior assisted living complex. All of these avenues for financing were eventually abandoned, yet the leadership and congregation of St. Mark's did not lose hope. Through the leadership and creativity of St. Mark's finance team, who had been working diligently on a variety of options, hope was renewed. Congregation member Jonathan Ocker brought the resources from his law firm Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe to the table. After months of careful exploration and research, a successful financing plan was brought forward to the congregation for their approval. On June 12, 2005, we approved this funding plan and agreed to vacate the sanctuary, allowing the retrofit and restoration work to begin.
Okay, I would like to make a motion that the congregation of St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church, San Francisco, California, hereby authorizes the expenditure of $10.2 million for the seismic reinforcement and renovation of our historic church building.
I'd like to announce the results of the balloting, and I'll just remind you it only requires a simple majority according to our Constitution. By a vote of 139 in favor, by a vote of 135 in favor, 3 no, and 1 abstention, the motion has been passed, and we will start our retrofit.
Next week then at both services we will have a ritual, a liturgy of leave-taking with a primary celebration at the 11 o'clock service, a procession out of the sanctuary where everybody will process together. We will carry our worship materials with us to process over to the auditorium for a service of blessing and a hymn and coffee hour over in the auditorium. That's next Sunday. Next Sunday will be the last chance to hear this order.
A day at St. Mark's is never exactly like the next day.
And it's clear that ministry happens in this place 7 days a week. And to have a seismically retrofitted building, to spruce it up, to do renovations, just poises us for more ministry here, for community outreach, for this building to be used 24/7. And we're prepared to do that, and the leadership and pastors are committed to do that.
A week later, on June 19, 2005, at a festive service to go into our exile in the Urban Life Center, the keys were handed over to our ELS architects and plant construction. We joyfully processed out of our building. Plant construction, ELS architecture and urban design, and structural engineer A.T. Marovich and Associates formed the core of a professional team that had worked with St. Mark's for over 10 years to find the best affordable design to comply with San Francisco requirements and meet our congregational goals. St. Mark's members had long wondered, what will it be like to leave our beloved sanctuary and worship in the ULC? How will our celebrations be affected by this change? The past year has clearly demonstrated what our pastors have always emphasized. The church is us, not our building. And yet, we know that physical things, sacraments, artwork, rooms, have a powerful effect on our liturgies and faith. We found ourselves in the midst of an historic undertaking, reinforcing our 110-year-old landmark structure to better resist earthquake forces, and, as part of this effort, renovating the building to restore some of its lost beauty and to enhance our mission of service, education, and worship. As we rebuilt, we invited our guests and members to look at our building across the plaza where a rebirth was underway. The scaffolding, netting, and construction materials bore silent witness to the labors of committed contractors, architects, and engineers. The scene also spoke volumes about the commitment of our friends and members to the future of our congregation.
What about the kitchen, Barbara?
It's going to be wonderful.
Look how big. It'll be huge.
Well,
These walls down the middle.
which side is the stove on?
That's for your cook line right there. Yeah, right.
You like the old floor? You think the old floor?
In departing St. Mark's over a year ago, we knew that we would return to a much safer building, but also that we would find new 21st century amenities, such as a new kitchen, new bathrooms, new electrical, audio, and lighting systems, new nursery, improved heating and ventilation, and of course, a long-awaited Taylor and Booty organ. But most important of all, when we flung wide the doors to St. Mark's on December 10th, 2006, we hoped to find a worship space that looked like we'd done nothing at all. With new painting, stenciling, and gilding, the sanctuary was to appear much as it did 111 years ago. The 1894 workers were familiar with the maxim, "If it doesn't fit, force it," or the German equivalent. If steel beams at the balcony weren't a good fit, they bent them. Over the years, the east and west brick walls had moved away from the steel beams that supported the nave floor. The movement, probably during one or more earthquakes, was significant enough, 1 to 2 inches, to break some steel ties that connected the beams to the walls. Workers were shocked at the condition of some of the brick on the upper portions of the west wall, where the mortar can be scraped away like dust. In 2006, we celebrated Palm Sunday in exile, but with no less enthusiasm, for we knew that our temporary displacement was necessary to ensure that future generations will continue to mark this festival in the building that has been a spiritual home to so many before us. Local organ specialists, Hupelo and Rapowski Pipe Organs LLC, removed the old organ to be sold or used for parts. Outside, workers injected chemical grout into the layer of unconsolidated sand that sits under our foundations, creating a sandstone-like layer that will more uniformly support the church's foundations during an earthquake.
And the material, when it's finished doing its job, leaves the sand hardened, almost like a piece of sandstone. It only wants to come up to about 500 psi, so it's not a real strong segment, but it's enough to keep the material under the church from shifting. So that's what we end up with when we're done there.
Center coring was one of the most challenging and intriguing technologies used in our project. The goal was to develop a structural reinforcing design that would have minimal impact on the historic exterior and interior of our landmark building. A crane drilled 4 4-inch diameter holes between each pair of the stained glass windows.
So you see the man operating the drill, and because we're drilling down about 30 feet, we can't do it all in one bit. They have bits that are about 4 to 5 feet long and 4 inches in diameter. He'll drill down, and then when he gets to the bottom of the bit, he'll get the next piece of extension, and it's threaded. He screws them together, and then you keep going. Well, it's drilling down 4-inch diameter, and it's taking out the existing material as it drills down. You see this hose, it's actually a vacuum hose that pulls out that existing material, and then it goes into this barrel drum right here.
So what do you do if you hit oil?
Stop. We get rich.
A steel reinforcing rod, almost 2 inches in diameter, was lowered into each hole, and epoxy grout was pressure injected into the void between the existing brick and the new steel bar. This epoxy penetrated the adjacent brick, bonding the steel and brick into a composite column within the existing wall. Plant construction removed brick withes in preparation for the application of shotcrete on many of the interior wall surfaces. A withe is a single vertical layer of masonry, 4 inches wide at our brick walls. The contractors had to remove 1 or 2 withes of brick on much of the inside face of the walls before applying concrete reinforcing in the towers and the lower floor. Much of the seismic reinforcement of our building was accomplished by building a concrete structure within the existing brick exterior walls, a building within the building. Workers spray-applied concrete, known as shotcrete, over the rebar grid and dowels, forming a concrete wall that is integrally connected to the existing masonry. They built this concrete liner at the inside faces of many of the masonry walls, starting with Heritage Hall and gradually moving up to the main floor and towers. They also added a new concrete slab at the narthex ceiling to support the new organ. In Heritage Hall, workers removed the old wood flooring so that it could be replaced with a structurally sound plywood diaphragm to stiffen the perimeter walls and structurally tie the building together. Overhead, the ceiling was filled with new wood blocking to stiffen the sanctuary floor and tie the exterior walls together. Workers installed steel reinforcing bars in anticipation of shotcrete applications at the new shear walls located at the north and south edges of Heritage Hall. The shear walls are designed to provide lateral stability to the building, just as the sides of a cardboard box keep adjacent sides from falling flat. The new shear walls will resist the sideways forces created by an earthquake and transfer these forces to the foundations, which in turn transfer the force to the soil that was earlier solidified with a soil grout. And yes, without a separate pantry, the kitchen has become larger and our gourmet chefs will have a view to the south through the former pantry window.
8 burners with a grill in the middle, so we can do pancakes there.
Fire protection workers installed main piping for new automatic sprinkler lines that will protect the building and occupants should a fire ever start.
Truss together with a filler block, and then the threaded rod. There's another block down here and a plate, and it's sandwiching it to kind of keep it locked in.
Plant workers have repaired and strengthened the major trusses, reinforced the truss column connections, and applied concrete for new beams to reinforce the parapets and stiffen the long east and west walls. The balcony had been a major challenge for our engineer and contractors. The sinuous shape and column-free front edge have stayed in the air for over a century, but the structure for this large horseshoe didn't conform to modern code requirements or structural analysis and could have failed during an earthquake. To strengthen the balcony, an inspired system of steel cables that tie the structure more securely to the reinforced church walls was built. The cables attach to large eye bolts welded to steel plates and are connected to the exterior wall beneath the balcony. Plasterers applied metal lath and new plaster beneath the steel reinforcing mesh, keeping all of this structural work hidden from view. Lighting designer Tom Munn created a lighting design to enhance our liturgies and the architecture of our worship space. He and his crew completed the installation of the theatrical lighting fixtures that will highlight the chancel and organ. Decker Electric installed the new chandeliers in the sanctuary. The slate installation took about 2 weeks, and the roofing project was completed when all of the copper flashing and roofing accessories were in place.
We haven't yet signed on the line, but we have actually the painter, an expert in special decorative painting.
I saw she was here up in the corner taking little chips.
Yeah, we're meeting with them tomorrow morning.
Do that because of the material that's on there right now. It's kind of chalky and nothing will stick to it.
Uh-huh.
So it can't be just
So
regular.
we can't
even if
just
you
ask for
wanted it to be
donations of
regular,
buckets of paint
that's
from home
right, it
kind of
wouldn't
thing.
work.
If you use modern painting products,
Yeah.
it won't adhere because
right.
it was called a distemper. It's like I think it's tempera paint is usually an egg-based water and egg-based paint.
Yeah.
And nothing will stick to it. So either it has to be fully removed, or there's a process that they're looking at now where they can actually add a kind of a reinforcing mesh, very fine mesh that goes over it, and then put basically a skim coat of plaster over that, and then they can paint that.
Evergreen painting was able to restore the ceiling and walls of the sanctuary to closely resemble their 1895 conditions. They also painted the liturgical furniture, such as the altar and font, so that they appeared as fresh as the worship space when we returned to the building on December 10th. Although our funding did not allow a full restoration of the stained glass windows as part of our current project, we have had a gifted and well-qualified local artist, Justin Zolli, replace about a dozen pieces of glass that were either missing or badly broken. At the completion of the construction project, St. Mark's prepared for the installation of our new Taylor & Booty instrument, their Opus 37. The delivery truck arrived with thousands of pieces and pipes on Monday morning, November 6, 2006. Carried in with the help of numerous St. Mark's volunteers with strong backs, workers from Virginia assembled and prepared our new organ throughout November and December.
Oh, that comes out there with it too.
It's the biggest pipe in the, other than the 16-foot Posauna.
In January, George Taylor and an assistant completed the final delicate voicing and tuning of each pipe.
But it is wonderful to finally to see that this organ get here after all the places it's been, all the times we've dismantled it and reassembled it and moved it.
Renovation Commission to unveil the new cornerstone. He also designed our cornerstone for us, Gary.
Peace be to this house.
And all who enter here.
As we returned to our historic home on December 10th, 2006, our sanctuary continued its 110-year tradition of shaping and inspiring our worship. Our voices reverberated within its walls, and the building itself was rededicated to God's praise and glory.
To rededicate this church for the worship of Almighty God and for the building up of the body of Christ.
The words of St. John Chrysostom. Paint your house with the colors of modesty and humility. Make it radiant with the light of justice. Decorate it with the finest gold leaf of good deeds. Adorn it with the walls and stones of faith and generosity. Crown it with the pinnacle of prayer. In this way, you will make it a perfect dwelling place for the Lord.
Fling wide the door, unbar the gate. The King of glory comes in state. The Lord of lords and King of kings. The Savior of the world, who brings his great salvation to